Hello, this is Joe. We're going to talk Mount Rushmore today because President Trump did his Declaration of Independence historical speech at Mount Rushmore. I have my America 250th Anniversary Declaration of Independence shirt on tonight, facing my wife. So let's delve into the story of Mount Rushmore. And what's really interesting here is I've actually looked at this book here about Mount Rushmore. Okay, it's an interesting book about creating Mount Rushmore. It started in 1923, and I'll show you real quick. Here's the book. See, if you look at the picture here, you notice the size of the workers here on the base here of Washington. I think this is Washington. Look at the size comparison to the base. It's interesting here. And so now, this is Mount Rushmore completed here. Now let's look at this here. First thing you have to do is look at the why for Mount Rushmore. Now, Mount Rushmore was actually envisioned in 1923. It was envisioned by a sculptor, and the important thing about it is it started in Georgia. Now, I have limited knowledge on Mount Rushmore, but what I do know about it, and we'll talk about this here, is just look at this. Look at the sculptures here. Just look at the sculptures and envision the size of these sculptures and how they did it. Now, I want to show you a picture here of the work being done on Mount Rushmore. You can see that picture in this book here. Look at the size and the size comparison of all these individuals working on the sculpture. Now, one of the important things about the sculpture in Mount Rushmore, what's the most important thing about this? Two most important things about the structure, the sculpture. And what is it like? What is that one thing right there about this? First thing is the why. Why Mount Rushmore? Now, this was envisioned in 1923 and went through the 30s. So we have to look at the why. Now, I'm a top historian, and I just started looking at this book here today because President Trump did his speech. So I read this book right now. I just barely started it. But from what I do know about Mount Rushmore, and we're going to look at, I'm going to get wrong on some stuff here. I'll get it right, but some stuff I'll get wrong on it. But the important thing is we're going to look at the why. Why did the sculpture want to create Mount Rushmore? Now, we look at here how they envisioned Mount Rushmore, how it was created. Now, if you look at, let's get some size comparisons. Look at these people standing here, okay? And they're looking up, okay? And they're looking up. Here's somebody working on the sculpture here. So let's look at some size comparisons of Mount Rushmore. Okay. Now look at the scale model. This is interesting about how the Mount Rushmore was created. Now, there was a scale model of Mount Rushmore, of course, created. So we look at the size of it. We look at the comparison of it. We just get a feel for what it looks like. Now, if we look at the sculpture here, what do you notice about the sculptures? This sculpture now, obviously, during the presidencies of Washington, Jefferson, there was no camera. But during the time of Lincoln, there was pictures of him, photographs of him, and Theodore Roosevelt, there was photographs of him. So now, does George Washington really look like that? Seriously, you get from painting, but was that really his face in Jefferson? Did they really look like that? Because nobody knows, because there's no existing photographs of them other than paintings, drawings, and other things that are done with their images. So always in history, you look at Washington and you look at Jefferson. Everybody says, yeah, that's what George Washington looked like. That's what Thomas Jefferson looked like. And you just take that as a grain of salt and say, yep, that's what George Washington looked like. Okay? But there were paintings made of him. So, but his sculpture, his picture of him and Jefferson, you never know what he really, really looked like. But we do know what Lincoln looked like, because we have photographs of him, and we don't know what Theodore Roosevelt looked like, and we have photographs of him. So if you take this here and just look at the face of each one of these individuals, okay? Now this is solid stone. This is solid stone rock. Let's just take a look at this right here. Let's look at the facial features of these guys. Look at Theodore Roosevelt. Look at Lincoln's eyes. Look at his structure. Look at his face. Just look at him. They have an expression. Washington's stoic. He's thinking. He's commanding. You see his face, he's commanding. Jefferson, he's contemplating here. I mean, he's contemplating. He's writing the Declaration of Independence. His eyes, he's contemplating. He's thinking. He's looking. Look at the eyes of Abraham Lincoln. Look at his facial expression. What about Lincoln? You'll notice about him? What do you notice about him? His eyes are a little down, drooping a little bit. He's tired. Maybe he's got some bags under his eyes here. His mouth looks a little down, a little bit like this. He is sad. He is concerned. Let's talk a little bit about each one of these individuals for a few minutes. And then let's look at Theodore Roosevelt. Now, the important thing is when you look at Theodore Roosevelt was never supposed to be president. Okay? So let's start here for a second. Theodore Roosevelt from New York. He was a trust buster. So what did they do? They said, we're going to put Theodore Roosevelt vice president of the United States. He can't really do much of anything. Okay? Theodore Roosevelt, he can't do much of anything. So we're going to talk about the sculptures, and we're going to talk about stuff on it, and we're going to talk about these individuals, how they're created, but we're also talking about the why and what these guys did. So Theodore Roosevelt was what? He was a trust buster. And it's like I just said. So what do you want to do? We're going to put him as vice president of the United States. That's going to keep him away from us. Okay? Now, he was related to FDR by cousins and direct, I think by second or third cousins. I'm not 100% sure on that, but they were definitely related. So, what happens? McKinley gets assassinated in 1898. 1901, I think it was. Yeah. And guess who becomes president? Theodore Roosevelt. Well, he's continuing the trust busting, all this other stuff with Attorney General, all this other stuff. And up in 1910, the Standard Oil Company with Rockefeller would be dissolved into numerous companies. Oh, that's for another day about business. But look at him. When you look at Roosevelt, he was an avid hunter, an outdoorsman. Him and John Muir were very good friends. They knew each other, very good friends. And Theodore Roosevelt created the National Park System. Okay, and Yosemite and all this other stuff. He was a rough rider during the 1898 Spanish-American War. He went hunting, he went African safaris, he was shot in the chest, threw something in his pocket, and he kept talking another hour and a half. So he was a really iconic president. Because you look by, one of the things you got to look at. Now let's look at here and let's look at this first. What? This president in order. Okay. Now, okay, so we got, now let's look at the presidents. Okay. Now, remember Mount Rushmore, so we can all have a feel of who's here, who's on the Mount Rushmore. So let's go up to 1923 is Warren Harding. Okay. Now this is when they started preparing the process of doing Mount Rushmore. So now let's look at all these presidents here. We have George Washington. George is going to be on that. Now we have John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, Monroe. Now, okay, so obvious choice would be George Washington. Okay? Thomas Jefferson, Jefferson Smith. So look at John Adams. John Adams is an early statesman. He defended the British soldiers as the Boston Massacre before the Revolutionary War. James Madison, Madison wrote a lot. He was really a great president. John Quincy Adams, he was involved with the stopping of the speech in Congress related to slavery. He tried to stop it. He was the only president that became a congressman. Andrew Jackson, he was, for what we see, he was cheated out of his election. In 1824 election, he had a good presidency, but he had the banking issues. Okay, Mark Van Buren's not much really known about him. William Henry Harrison was only in for 30 days because he passed away. John Tyler, he was pretty much unpopular president, and he was not celebrated after he passed away. He was buried in the South. Polk, he gave us Texas and a few other things. He did some good stuff. Fillmore, really not much to know about him. Franklin Pierce, pretty much. So you got Tyler, Polk, Zachary Taylor, Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, James Buchanan. These presidents here, they're kind of like the in-between, not really much is known about them. Now an expert, which I'm not, I'm the Southwest historian, would know like the deep stuff. Like we know Polk was involved with Texas. We know Zachary Taylor was a general, and we know Franklin Pierce did some good stuff. James Buchanan didn't do anything. He allowed the Civil War to begin. So now let's look here. So George Washington for sure. John Adams, but you could have put Madison there or Adams, but Jefferson, who wrote the Declaration of Independence, was that not? Andrew Jackson, the type of man he was, how he was like strong. Of all these guys, Tyler, Polk, Taylor, Fillmore, and Pierce, these are like your very decent presidents, but not really a lot more about them. We'll get in depth about them later, but they had some good stuff they did, some of them. James Buchanan, he just sat by and left the Civil War. Now, if you look at these guys here, from all these guys in here, all this was doing was appeasing slavery and slaveholders and the slave trade in these presidents here. Okay. Then we had Abraham Lincoln. Now, preserving the Union, yes, he belongs there. Okay. Andrew Johnson, he was a Democrat, but he was loyal to the Union, and that's why, and he got impeached, but he didn't get convicted. Now, Grant, as a soldier, commander of the Civil War, yes, he was good, but he was a bad president. Hayes, okay. Now, James Garfield, Jesse Arthur, okay. Now, William McKinley. when McKinley gave us the tariffs and all this other stuff. He was a pretty decent president. Then we have Theodore Roosevelt, who created the national park system. Now let's eliminate the presidents after Theodore Roosevelt. So let's look up here. So we're gonna look at who should have been on Mount Rushmore? Definitely George Washington. Okay, definitely Abraham Lincoln. Those, yes, definitely those two. Okay, now let's look at why Theodore Roosevelt but not William McKinley. Okay. Now, unfortunately, William McKinley was shot in office, but he did do 4 years. He did decent stuff, William McKinley. But if you could pick McKinley over Theodore Roosevelt, it probably would be Theodore Roosevelt because how he created the Rough Riders, how he was a evangelist and created the national park system. What we know today in John Muir, I think Theodore Roosevelt would have been a good pick. Now, the hard problem up here is Adams, Jefferson, Madison. All these guys here were really establishing America in the early times. Under John Adams, we had the Alien Sedition Acts. Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. Madison, one of the greatest writers and orators in American history. James Monroe of the Manifest Destiny. So, my opinion, George Washington for sure. Jefferson for sure. I'm sorry, George Washington for sure. And Abraham Lincoln. Thomas Jefferson, because he's writing on the Declaration of Independence. And then at the period of time in 1923, if you go back from Theodore Roosevelt would have been a good pick. Okay? Because after Lincoln had Johnson, Grant, Hayes. So during Hayes' period of time, we were dealing with the ending of the Reconstruction. Chesnay Arthur had a pretty good, did some decent things in the presidency, had some good things happen, developing the country exploding. James Garfield was assassinated, so we didn't really get much was known about him. So what we're looking at here is a presidency that, yes, these are the individuals who should be put on Mount Rushmore. For sure, George Washington. For sure, Abraham Lincoln. But Thomas Jefferson, Declaration of Independence, author, yes, and Theodore Roosevelt, yes, based on what we talked about. So now, let's look at these individuals. Let's do a little bit of history about these guys. So we delved in a little bit about Theodore Roosevelt. Now, Theodore Roosevelt not only was a decent president, he did some decent things. He tried to run for a third term on a different party and was defeated. And let's take a look at that. I want to make sure that I'm right. In the election, here he is right here. And he was beaten by Taft. Now, William Taft didn't want to be president, he wanted to be Supreme Court Justice, which he was. So let's look at the election here of okay, let's look at this election. 1/9/12 presidential election. Okay. Now Woodrow Wilson. See, Theodore Roosevelt. Okay, Woodrow Wilson won the election, like I was saying, but he won on a progressive ticket. See, progressive and Democrats were different back then. There were different party ideologies. And so he ran for a third term. Okay, he ran for a third term, but he lost. Okay, so yeah, all right. Okay, now let's get back. So he ran for a third term and he lost the third term under a different ticket. So if we look at Theodore Roosevelt, the stuff that he was able to complete, able to do, and began the process of breaking up like companies like Standard Oil and these other large companies. General Telephone would be one in the future. So if you look at what was done with Theodore Roosevelt, the fact that he created and developed and did all this stuff, and he was a hero in the War of 1898, Spanish-American War. He deserved to be president. He deserved to be on this on Mount Rushmore, because every time you go to National Park, it's because of Theodore Roosevelt. He started this, and he was very good friends and knowledge and knew John Muir, who investigated and documented many different lands, including the Yellowstone Park. Now, what we want to look into here is not only building the national treasure of Mount Rushmore, but the why these people here. Now, let's look at Lincoln here. When you go back to the time of a Constitutional Convention in 1787, what was the main sticking point in America? Slavery. And what they did was, because they just got done with the Revolutionary War, we wanted to create a country, we wanted to create a country, we wanted to create a country, and we wanted it to be United States, not like Europe as individual little countries. So they pushed slavery down there. They had the debates about it, like 3/5 of a person, all that stuff. They pushed it down for tax. They pushed that down the line, and down the line, it became Abraham Lincoln's doing it in his Cooper Union speech. He eloquently stated, because a country cannot serve and be a country half free, half slave. And with the Dred Scott case in 1857, that's what I'm talking about, the birthright citizenship case and the Supreme Court just recently. That was the beginning of the Civil War right there, the Dred Scott case. And the Fugitives Stay Black and all this other stuff. So what Lincoln did, he has a young man, he failed a lot of stuff, it's well documented, he failed a lot here, and he failed a lot there, and he did a lot of stuff that he failed at. But one thing he was good about is one thing. Well, he's a decent lawyer. What was he really good about? He's persistent. He wouldn't quit. He kept pushing, and finally they nominated, after like 60 or 70 nominations or whatever it was, they nominated him for president. And they had him completely off the southern ballot in the South. And he still won the presidency. So now we're not going to get into a long in-depth there about the Civil War, because that's taking me hours and days and hours to talk about that. But what Lincoln gave America was the ending of slavery. Okay, at first the war was about what? Preserving the Union. That was the first about the war. But once 1862 came around, the war was going on for about a year. The Emancipation Proclamation came around in 1862, and it says any state free, a slave states not in the rebellion, like border states not in rebellion, the president declared the slaves free. But did he have the authority to do that? Because wasn't a slave considered chattel property at the time? I'm not sure, but I've looked that up. But based on the 1857 Supreme Court case, pretty much was. Except the homicide case, but there's a great movie by Steven Spielberg. So the thing about this is, Lincoln freed the slaves, saved America, kept America free, and gave us all the history that we know today. So Lincoln belonged on Mount Rushmore, and the thing about this is his space here, they created his space in a way that shows his concern, his tiredness. He is concerned, because remember, obviously telephone was invented the 1880, the year that the phone was invented by Graham Bell. But they did have the telegraph at Lincoln's time, and he was always at the telegraph office. Now, if you go here, I'm going to show you something. National Internet Archive. Okay, now if you go to Internet Archive, there should be something here. Okay, wait. Now, if you look, okay, maybe I'm doing this in the wrong spot. Okay. Now, if you look at this stuff here, what I'm talking about here, let's go up here. I'm going to show you this here. Okay, what is it? Okay. Now, if you look at images here. Now, here's what I'm talking about. During the time of Lincoln's presidency, he would receive. Okay, here's like a little source. So here, I'm not sure this is one exactly. So here's what I'm talking about. Okay, now these are searchable. They're in the National Archives. I just Googled it real quick. Now I'm not sure what this one says here, but if you look at this here, okay, okay. See, that's something I don't want that. But if you do some research here on okay, so what President Lincoln would be getting, he would get these okay, it's going about his assassination. What I'm trying to show you guys is that Lincoln was at the telegraph office constantly, continuously, day after day. Maybe they're talking about day after day. I'm trying to find not about Lincoln's passing. I'm trying to find something about his really receiving these notices of soldiers or assassins killed in battle, and it really affected him personally. And his son's Todd, I think it was Tad, who passed away. I'm not sure. I have to make sure. So if you look at President Lincoln here, if you look at President Lincoln, you're going to notice the sculptors and the creator gave him that face of war, confidence in war, the strong, confident man, but of war. So Lincoln should be on Mount Rushmore. I'm sorry about that. I try to find you guys at least a casualty list that Lincoln would read these. He would be at the telegraph office daily reading these telegraphs coming in about what happened on the battlefield. and or wherever else he was dealing with. Now let's look at this here. Let's look at Mount Rushmore. Now look at Lincoln again. Take a look at his face. His mouth kind of down, drooping a little bit. His eyes are tired. His eyelids are. He's kind of tired. That's a perfect look of him. That's a perfect creation for him. And same thing about Theodore Roosevelt. Strong. He was a good man, Theodore Roosevelt. And those pictures we have of them, you can see them and the way they look. But you can see that their face is matching the sculpture, which is amazing. Now let's look at Thomas Jefferson here. Now Thomas Jefferson was the third president. And here's the thing. We all know that Washington was elected unanimously on both tickets. There's no opposition. We had the all electoral college because of George Washington, the founder of our country. But when the election came from 1800, there was a debate. Remember, back then, the president didn't choose his VP. The VP was the one who came in second. So the thing about this is Jefferson and Adams were bitter enemies in the presidency. Because some people say that Jefferson should have won the election at 1800, and there was debates and all this other stuff. A lot of things going on there. Adams became president. Jefferson became VP, and then Jefferson came into the presidency. Remember, here's the thing: is the 1803 Marbury versus Madison, the Supreme Court ruled the law of the land. We'll talk about that case later, but it's about creating and appointing seats when your turn's about up. Okay, but the documents for certification for these individuals to take the visit, they were never delivered. So Jefferson had to deal with Adams' appointments at the beginning of his term, and the Supreme Court took care of all that. And Jefferson had to deal with the Barbary pirates and all this other stuff. But he was also the writer of the Declaration of Independence. Okay, now let's look at Jefferson. Now we're going to spend about a few minutes talking to each one of these individuals. We can delve in deep later about these guys as presidents and what the aura is about them, because there's so many books written about Washington, Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, Lincoln, so many books. So many people know about this story, but you have to look about what about these guys? Why was Jefferson put on this thing? We just talked about it. Okay, we talked about it. And one of the most important things was the Declaration of Independence. Okay, now they say the purchase of Louisiana Territory was unconstitutional because only Congress can, with approval, can get that land, but we got it, and well, lo and behold, now the United States of America's land is almost twofold. So Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, his writings, his papers, Monticello, what he did for the country, how he created the aura of the presidency, the world known, because remember, during the time of the Declaration of the Constitutional Convention, Jefferson, if I'm not mistaken, was in England. And I think Franklin was there. I could be wrong. So you look at these different issues. Yes, this guy Jefferson belongs here on Mount Rushmore, not only because of the way he worked, not only because of what kind of man he was, but his ability. This guy was a brilliant man. He was a writer. He was a cultivator. He did a lot of stuff, man. He was just amazing. But his enduring thing about him was his writing of the Declaration of Independence. Now it had to be revised. Things had to be revised on it. So yeah, put him in here. Put him up here because of what he did for the country. And the important thing about, not only about Jefferson, was about how he developed and turned America into a superpower with the purchase of the Louisiana Purchase. But the fact of the matter is how the world saw Jefferson and how the country started developing this icon. Now let's spend a couple minutes because we're going to do a little bit of what do you call it? A little bit of biography and each one of these presidents, why they belong here. Now let's take go to Washington. Why Washington? Not everybody knows why, but let's actually think about it. Why George Washington? Father of our country. First president unanimously elected. President Constitutional Convention. Surveyor. Mount Vernon. One thing about Washington is really, really, really important to look at here. What was that? The man he was. Okay. Remember, he fought I think he fought the Indian Wars, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think he fought the French and Indian War, but I could be wrong on that. But I know he was a leader for the British in a French and Indian Wars, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong on that, but double check myself. But the thing about Washington was his ability, his aura, his strength, his convictions. If you look at his face, he's strong, he's stoic. Okay? And about Washington, not only was the first president, but the thing about this, the greatness of George Washington, what was the greatness about George Washington? Few things. What was the greatness about Washington? After 2 terms, what did he do? Yes. Now let's look at this here. One of the most important things in history to look at. Okay. Well, sorry about my typing, guys. I don't type very well, but I'm doing the best. Now, if you look at George Washington, his farewell speech. Now, remember, when George Washington became president, what was the first thing they didn't like? They didn't like political parties. But what happened with Adams and Jefferson, just the next president over. So, now we're not going to go over his farewell speech. It's not about that. But it's not a very long speech, but it's important. Just like the Gettysburg Address, it's not very long. Okay. So he's concerned about what? Political parties, concerned about stuff, issue with the Constitution, how things are, taxes. So remember, George Washington dealt with a whiskey rebellion, okay? And he was going to send troops down there to quell it. So, and the important thing is, his farewell speech really came out, okay? He says, I beg you at the same time, do me justice to be sure that the resolution will not be taken up without its strict regard, advise a dutiful citizens country. Okay? So if you look at this speech, he's concerned about political parties, about getting along. Okay? About loving your country. affections of your country. So this is an important thing to look at about George Washington, because the thing about George Washington, he walked away from the presidency. He could have been reelected again. Could have done 3 or 4 terms. He could have been there as long as he wanted until he passed away. But the thing about it is George Washington walked away from the presidency, because remember, during the Constitutional Convention in 1787, George Washington eloquently said during the debate part of the Constitutional Convention, says, how is the new executive going to be addressed? Your Highness? Your Holiness? Well, it would be Your Holiness, Your Highness, or whatever. And Washington said, George Washington said, no, Mr. President. And that right there was the bringing down of the crown, the bringing down of the British Empire, and giving us a mark of this 250th anniversary. So that's what was important about George Washington. The simple facts of, let's call it, let's Mr. President. You know, simple as that. And George Washington, after 2 terms, walks away and retires to Mount Vernon. That's the greatness of George Washington. Now, everybody's president, we can go and delve in a lot deeper and go really through history. But if you guys just look at this picture here, look at these guys' faces. They created these guys' faces based on how history is going to see them. How history will see these guys. Now, like I showed you before the beginning of my conversation, so this book is a great book about the carving of Mount Rushmore. This really isn't about the carving, pretty much about Mount Rushmore, but it's about Mount Rushmore. I want to thank you guys for coming here. Happy anniversary to the United States of America. I'm proud to be an American. I love my country. I thank you guys for being here. And remember, keep wishing, keep enjoying what you do. And obviously, if I'm wrong on something, let me know, because I'm a self-taught historian, and I do get things wrong occasionally. Your opinion is going to be different than mine, obviously. But just look at the faces for one more time. Just look at the hair they did. They created this awesome, wonderful creation of man. And the important thing about Mount Rushmore, it's iconic. Now, I know that I think they're building or they're sculpting a Geronimo. I'm not sure if they're doing that, done that yet, but I'm just curious to see what happened there. Hey guys, happy 4th of July, man. I love you guys coming in my broadcast and let me know what your opinions are. Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys. And have a good night and happy 4th of July.